Welcome to episode 14, Car Suspension, How Cars Achieve a Soft Enough Ride Without Wheel Hop and Loss of Control. In episode 10, we introduced open-ended acceleration, velocity and displacement with the rocket car. Force was a constant. In episodes 11 and 12, we included air resistance and changing forces in motion problems. We took velocity, the output of the first account, made air resistance out of it, then sent this new force to the front of the chain to modify overall force. Air resistance took energy away from falling skydiver or the kicked soccer ball and got it out of the model as heat. In episode 13 we saw that two accounts and an inverted feedback path would oscillate. We will see that we have this path in our car suspension model. How do we stop wheel hop bouncing? Which is just another version of energy needing to leave a model. We tap the same point in the chain that we used to make air resistance, the output of the first account. To simplify the car suspension, we will deal with one corner of a car. Let's say our corner of the car weighs 800 pounds. The wheel always follows the contour of the road. The car body sits on a big spring that establishes an average height of our 800 pounds of car at 10 inches above the wheel hub. When a curb is struck, the spring is instantly compressed in our model. Let's say the compression is to 7 inches, 3 inches less than steady state. The spring, being restorative, pushes down on the wheel and up on the car. This force gets the velocity account changing and ultimately the car position account changing. As the undamped car bounces along, energy is either in position or velocity. As the car height above the wheel peaks, let's say at 13 inches, velocity will temporarily be 0. A bit later when the spring gets the car back to 10 inches above the wheel, velocity will be peaking as the car heads towards the bottom of its travel at 7 inches. Introducing our energy removal device. It is called a shock absorber, or damper, or dashpot. It is usually a fluid-filled chamber with a piston in the middle. The piston has holes drilled in it. If I pick up the absorber, I find I can change its degree of extension if I push on it or pull on it with lots of force for some period of time. I am forcing fluid through the small holes. As I apply force to it, it applies force back to me. When I stop pulling or pushing, the shock absorber sits at its new position. It is not restorative, it is just lossy. Pushing fluid through the small holes creates heat and this heat goes off to the far corners of the universe and never comes back. We are ready for the model. Here is velocity. Here is displacement. Our starting condition is that a bunch of teenagers have been sitting on the car and now they all slide off. Our spring was compressed to support 800 pounds of car and people. Now the people are gone. The spring contains excess energy for its new load, and now pushes up on the car and down on the wheel. This force over car mass will get the accounts oscillating. To keep things simple, we will use 1 for car mass. We start with our shock absorber energy path turned off by putting a zero-gain block in the path. Now a new feature, our energy meter. We are arguing that without the shock absorber, the bounce energy within a car that just had its load lightened will be constant unless we create a path to dump energy. So we look to our animation of spring mass sinusoidal motion to find a constant. Our constant energy is linked to the constant radius of the circle of motion. Our simplified energy meter involves squaring both position and velocity, and then summing those squares. Here are the squaring blocks. Here is the summation block. This is most of the Pythagorean theorem. What is missing is taking the square root of the sum of the squares. The reason we don't is that potential energy of spring position is proportional to the square of the length of forced expansion or compression. This is Hooke's law. The kinetic energy law requires that we square velocity. Square rooting the sum of the squares is not necessary or appropriate. Further, Squaring guarantees us positive numbers to some, so unchanging total energy should be a flat line on a graph. When we allow energy to leave the system through shock absorber heat, the total energy meter line should go down over time. Now a question to keep in mind for later. Should we expect a smooth loss of energy with a standard decay type curve, like the cooling cup of tea? First run, let's watch it with the shock absorber turned off. Sheet 1. We see sine wave on the accounts after the teenagers slide off. Sheet 2. What about the energy meter? It is positive and constant. Energy has no way to leave the system. Now let's put in the shock absorber. In this model, we will start with a shock absorber factor at minus 0.25 of the velocity, so we will see some damping, but not too much. Sheet 1. We have sine wave that reduces over time. Sheet 2. We have reducing system energy. Can we guess at the general shape of our reducing energy curve? If there is a lot of energy, our rate of energy removal is high. If there is little energy, our rate of energy removal is much less. This feels exponential. But we see lumps. What causes the lumps? We are only removing energy from the system when there is velocity. When the car body is peaking high or low, we have no velocity. There is no energy removal while position peaks. Is there a best ride compromise? Yes. It is generally 1.5 bounces after a change of load. We have a value for this model that will give us 1.5 bounces. Let's put it in. If you didn't know it, you could find it by trial and error. Here we are. Here is the 1.5 bounce energy loss curve. This 1.5 bounce response is usually called critical damping. See you next time for predator-prey cycles. A fox population peaking a quarter cycle after a rabbit population peaks. If nature bounces, can we find our oscillation causing path in the model? Scilab is software buy-in for the world's community. Help them with dollars, publicity, and contribute code. TTS Voices copyrighted 2014 and licensed by LinguaTech, GmbH. Visit them at linguatech.de. Text and graphics copyrighted 2019 by William Rhodes Design.